Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you don't mind, I was going to defer to Senator Kane for the moment and then go next.
I mind.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, General Breedlove. Again, I echo the comments about your service. You've addressed most of my questions, but one area that we've spent a lot of time on in this committee, kind of at the edges of, is a concern about the nation's cyber doctrine. Sort of, when is a cyber attack an act of war? When is it sort of a lesser magnitude? What should our response be? Do we have a deterrence doctrine? If we do we publicize it? If we don't publicize it, does it really deter? But I'm kind of curious about Article 5 and collective self-defense. If you could talk about NATO-level discussions on this question of when a cyber attack of a NATO ally would potentially trigger an Article 5 common defense obligation.
Again, Senator, would love to offer some folks to come talk to you about in a classified.
Great.
But there are things we can say here which I think are very pertinent to your question. When I came to NATO about 3 years ago, NATO was in a very nascent place as it relates to cyber activity and how they would react to cyber. I must tell you that in an unqualified way, that has changed. As you know, we have come under cyber attack. We're under cyber attack every day. And so the nations have very much understood that there are 28 doors into our alliance. And if we have a few that are massive and well-formed and a few that are wide open, we have an issue. And so we have had a better understanding of the collective requirement to address this challenge. And I think I'll stop there on that piece. And what I would offer to you is to have your MLA, maybe the next time you're in Europe, take you through Tallinn, Estonia, and see the Center of Excellence there. It is an incredibly well-functioning place. It is putting out usable tools and capabilities to our alliance, and it's making a difference. And you would be able to see a little bit firsthand if you were to visit that in Tallinn.
I would love to do that, and I think this is a topic that the committee, I'm sure, will be spending a lot more time on generally, cyber doctrine. The second thing, I'm really interested in U.S. activities to train the militaries of foreign nations. You know, in terms of building up a NATO capacity, certainly it's the budgetary question, but also the U.S., we do some of our best work on the training side, and in particular, since 2010, you've had a Black Sea Rotational Force, which has been a Marine component attached to Eucom, which has some other responsibilities too, crisis response, but a lot of their work has been training the militaries, I guess especially in the southeastern portion of the Eucom geography. Describe a little bit the utility of the Black Sea Rotational Force in its 6 years of existence.
So, Senator, if I could, I'd really like to open that up even a little bit bigger, and I'll just use the work that the 173rd Sky Soldiers have just finished up in Ukraine and handed off to another unit there. I would tell you that your United States forces, all of them, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine, are doing some incredible things training our allies and partners in Europe, and the BSURF is an incredible example of that. And the nations that the BSURF specifically works with, of course, Romania, Bulgaria, are incredibly appreciative of what they do, and they are benefiting because we see the troops that they train serving alongside of us in Afghanistan and other places, and they are capable and a lot of times come with zero caveat and work and serve right alongside our folks. So let me just throw out a couple of other examples. The Marine work and now beginning some of the Army work in Georgia. Some of the finest soldiers that serve with us in Afghanistan and Kosovo and other places come from Georgia. At one point, Georgia was...
I think they're in the Kurdish region in northern Iraq as well, some of Georgians.
Yes, sir. They are serving alongside our NATO partners and allies in many, many places. And as I mentioned, we have just finished a very successful series of training opportunities in Yavoriv in Ukraine, where we've trained the National Guard forces, not exactly similar to our National Guard forces, but we've just finished that iteration, and now we are beginning to train the Ministry of Defense forces in Yavoriv, and this is an incredibly successful program, and the forces that we have been training have been doing very well as they then move forward. And I know you're aware as well, sir, we've just finished our first iteration of training Ukrainian SOF. And we're just starting the second class. Again, I just spoke to the ambassador now about 4 hours ago about some of the things going on in Ukraine, and he is very complimentary of both the work at Yavoriv and the work with the SOF. So there are multiple examples: Georgia, Romania, Ukraine, BSERF. These are all very successful, and in our allies and partners are producing soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who are serving alongside us in some tough places. I hope I was encouraging there, because this is a good news story.
I think it's a small portion of the DoD budget that we devote to training foreign militaries, whether it's overseas or bringing foreign military leaders here. But in terms of bang for the buck, it's one of the best expenses we make. Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Graham. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Cotton. I'm sorry.
Thank you. General, thank you very much. There are many years of service to our country. I want to return to something to which you alluded briefly in your testimony here before the House Armed Services Committee, and about which the chairman asked you. You said that Vladimir Putin is weaponizing immigration in Syria. Could you explain a little bit more what you mean by that concept?
Senator, thank you for the question. I think I have to step back a little bit in the conflict to start first with Bashar al-Assad, because this story builds from that point. And that is that what we have seen is the Assad regime using weaponry that has almost zero military utility. Again, as a fighter pilot, I understand the ballistics of a weapon. I've delivered a lot of them myself. And the ballistics of a barrel bomb does not lend itself to military utility. What it lends itself to is terrorizing populations, getting them on the move, getting them on the road, and making them someone else's problem. What we have seen is that continue into this weekend, that style of approach by the Assad regime. And then I would also say that what we see in our Russian counterparts in Syria is the use of a lot of very indiscriminate weapons. Then the percentage of precision weaponry used is very low, and it's hard to tell from what they're doing on their targets what their real intent are. But what we do see is that it is causing a lot of flow of people out of the stricken areas, getting them on the road and getting them into someone else's hair. Our ally Turkey, over 2 million they're taking care of. In Jordan, half of that. In Lebanon, a huge number. So what we have seen is not only the flow into Europe and other places caused by these efforts, but an intense flow into the neighboring nations. And so I have used that word. I use that because I cannot see the military utility of some of the actions being taken by these individuals in the conflict.
Most of these migrants and refugees are Sunni Arabs from Syria?
I can't say that, because we do see a pretty large migration flow still from Afghanistan and other places.
But from Syria?
From Syria, I don't want to hazard a guess there, sir. I'll get you an answer to that.
But while there may not be military application, it would be a convenient political development if Bashar al-Assad, who represents a minority sect in Syria, were to ethnically cleanse much of his country of Sunni Arabs, which have been a historic source of resistance to his rule. Destabilizing Jordan and Turkey, two key U.S. allies on its border, as well as destabilizing much of Europe, in the Balkans and Eastern and Central Europe. Is it a long-term goal of Vladimir Putin to ultimately divide the European Union and NATO?
Sir, I said that in my written testimony, and I think I actually said it in my opening statement as well. I do believe that one of the primary goals of Mr. Putin is to find a division in NATO and find a division in the European Union.
And we often speculate about the possibility of hybrid warfare, as it's called, in one of the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that would be a very high-risk maneuver if you're thinking about it from Vladimir Putin's standpoint, right?
So I believe Mr. Putin, as I said, does understand Article 5 and understands what a NATO border is as it relates to conventional force. But I do not believe that he feels necessarily restrained in using the other tools of national power, diplomatic, informational, economic, in these areas.
If you look at the political controversy that this flow of migrants and refugees has created over the last year in Europe, from Vladimir Putin's standpoint, it might appear that this is a much lower risk way to divide Europe against itself than that kind of risk of invading a NATO country, correct?
So I can't make that judgment for Mr. Putin, but what we have seen is that this is bringing great pressure on the nations of Europe.
What do you think is going to happen as winter turns to spring and we see more migrants and refugees? Just in the last week to 10 days, we've seen the Visegrad countries meet with the Balkans, excluding Greece from this meeting, in discussions about shutting the Macedonian-Greek border and therefore cutting off the land bridge for refugees and migrants going into Austria and Germany. Yet Chancellor Merkel has just said that she remains committed to keeping her borders entirely open. What's the end game here for Europe?
Sir, first to the first part of your question, I was just in the Balkans the last, about 2 weeks ago, visiting everyone from Montenegro to Serbia, actually, and on all of their minds is the concern of what happens in the spring, also what happens in the dynamics if some nations close borders and others don't. It could shift the pattern through nations that are even less capable of addressing these flows. And so this remains a big concern for the nations of the area.
Thank you, General. My time has expired, but I do think it's always important to remember that as troublesome as these flows of migrants and refugees are, it is merely a symptom, and the ultimate disease is the Syrian civil war, and the U.S. administration bears real responsibility for that disease.
Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, thank you for all your service to our country. When you were here before, when you were kind enough to appear before us, one of the subjects we talked about was Russian incursions into areas that they traditionally have not been. Russia's being intercepted along Great Britain's south coast, and that in order to avoid conflict, rather than going head-on with them sometimes, we have worked to move them out, but have not gone into greater conflict with them. Is this continuing apace at as great a rate as it was before? And how long do you think this will continue? And what message does it send to Putin that he can continue to do these things?
Sir, thank you. We did talk about that, and yes, we have seen the Russian Federation aircraft in places that we have not seen them before. And that still continues to today. But I need to be intellectually honest. I would tell you that it has decreased a little bit. I think that's primarily because there's a great focus right now on Syria. Assets are dedicated to Syria, other things. I'm not sure that we wouldn't see that go back up after a Syrian conflict. It may just be a question of capacity and focus, et cetera. So we need to be honest in our reporting that it's dipped a little bit as we've seen Syria pick up. And I would just like to say that I wouldn't question the words you use, but our responses to these things in these unconventional places have not been that we yield, but we do what is professionally correct in those responses in those spaces.
Okay. What is your worst scenario in regards to Russia? What are the things that you know, when you begin a day, you go, this would be the worst case that could happen?
Nuclear war. Yeah.
I would really love to do that in a classified sense. I would tell you that we see a force that is becoming more capable, more fully qualified. We see a force that is being used routinely in ways that we haven't seen in years. I have been pretty straightforward about that what we see now in Eastern Europe, that force is again a tool used to change internationally recognized borders. Russia continues to occupy the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea. Force was used to go across the international border of Ukraine in the Donbass, and some of those forces remain. And so my concern, sir, in an unclassified setting is that we see a force that is once again being used in ways that we thought were over in Europe.
It has appeared, and I don't know if this is the exact way to describe it, but it is almost as if Putin in Russia has talked about their nuclear arsenal in a fairly casual way. And when you look at this, what do you think we should make of it? One of the things that has been discussed is as our conventional strike munitions and conventional strike ability increases, they use this as an effort to try to balance against it. But what is your view of how fast and loose they actually are in this area?
Sir, I have remarked more than once publicly and in testimony that I think this is irresponsible talk or irresponsible behavior, the way that nukes are talked about, and they are talked about from the relatively junior military levels right up to the most senior members of the Russian Federation leadership. And none of us in the West believe that this is responsible behavior in the way that nukes are discussed. What do we do about it? First, we don't engage in that kind of discussion. Second, I think what's really important to me is that we retain a creditable, capable nuclear force, and that the world sees that force as being creditable and capable. And to your other question, that our increasing capabilities as it relates to precision, conventional attack, and other things, this is one of the reasons that we hear these discussions. If a situation is not going well, the other side discusses that nukes could be used to escalate, to de-escalate, et cetera. But I do not think that we should dampen our ability to use our conventional force in the way that we have used it in the past.
Thank you. My time is up. I just wanted to ask you, do you think that Vladimir Putin believes that Article 5 would be enforced, that all of the different members would come to the other members' defense if he took action in one of the NATO countries?
I believe he absolutely understands what Article 5 means in relation to a NATO boundary. And I would say, Senator, that the nations of NATO at the Wales Summit were very demonstrative, very quick about the absolute commitment to Article 5 collective defense.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your service to the country.
Senator Graham.
Thank you, General. You've done a really good job in your position here. It's 2016. Is it fair to say that Russia has successfully dismembered the Ukraine?
So I think that I'm not sure I would use those terms, but the way I would characterize it is Russia is right now holding the levers to bring great pressure and to adjust the way things happen in Kyiv. And by fielding a force in the Donbass, that will give him those levers into the future.
Well, if you don't like dismembered, what word would you use?
Sir, I think he is now able to exert great influence on what happens in Ukraine.
To the Ukrainian people's detriment and our detriment?
Sir, I believe that the Ukrainian people voted for a different agenda when they elected Mr. Poroshenko and Mr. Yatsenyuk.
So it's 2016. Do you agree with me that Russia has intervened on the side of Assad in a significant capacity?
I do believe, Senator, and I've said it before, that I believe the main effort of the Russian forces in Syria are to support the Assad regime.
The Russians have been bombing people we've trained in Syria. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Are the sanctions against Russia working?
Senator, I think that the combination of economic pressure, the drop in the fuel prices, and the sanctions that are on Russia, the combination of those have had effect.
Are they working? Are they changing Russian behavior?
Some months ago, or maybe even a month or so ago, I would have answered no. I think today, in a classified sense, I could come to you and say there are a few things we're beginning to see happen.
Well, I'd like to have that briefing because my answer would be no.
Sir.
I don't see them changing in a positive way at all. Maybe you should do this in a classified setting. What are we not doing that we could do that would change Russian behavior? You want to talk about that in a classified setting?
Sir, I'd love to do that.
Okay, let's talk about Turkey. Are you familiar with the Syrian Defense Forces?
I am, sir.
What percentage of that force is Kurdish?
That question I simply do not know, and I'll have to get you an answer to that.
Is it fair to say that Turkey has a problem with what we're doing inside of Syria with the Kurds?
Sir, I do believe that we have disagreements with our great ally over some of the approaches we take with the Kurdish forces in North Syria.
Do you see any scenario where the Syrian Defense Forces in their current construct could take Raqqa away from ISIL?
Sir, if I could ask you to ask that of the CENTCOM commander, I think you'd be better placed to answer that.
Okay. From a NATO perspective, in terms of Afghanistan, do you believe that NATO nations will follow whatever we do in terms of troops in 2017?
Sir, I do believe that the NATO nations are willing to follow our lead, and actually, I can't speak for those nations, but several have intimated that they would stay if required to get the mission done.
Would you recommend against going to 1,000 U.S. personnel in 2017 in Afghanistan, given what you know about Afghanistan?
Sir, what I have said is that I believe that we need to accomplish the mission we're there now, doing now, and that until we see that mission accomplished, I think we need to stay.
Have we accomplished that mission?
Not yet, sir.
The counterterrorism is a mission that we're trying to accomplish to stop an attack on the homeland. Is that correct?
Counterterrorism is an important part of that, yes, sir.
Okay. During your time in the military, have you seen more threats to America?
Sir, I think
before?
that we are in one of the toughest situations that we've faced in decades right now.
So, do you think it's smart for Congress, in light of what you just said, to reimpose sequestration next year?
Sir, allow me to speak to the European Command and my mission, and I have said that sequestration would be very tough on our ability to accomplish our mission.
Do you think it's the signal we want to send to our NATO allies as we tell them to up their spending, we cut ours?
I think it's important for us to lead, sir.
What kind of signal would it send to Russia?
I think they are watching exactly what we do with our modernization programs and our presence programs and our employment overseas, and it's important that we sustain the appropriate presence and capability forward.
Thank you for your service.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General, thank you for being here. A quick question is really to follow up on questions that Senator Lee and Cotton touched on. The divided West is a great threat for you in doing your job. One of the things you mentioned that sanctions seem to be having some effect. Do you believe that they're prepared to renew those sanctions going into summer in your discussion with our partners?
Sir, I learned a long time ago as the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO that I can't speak for the nation, so I would defer on that question. I think that that would be much I would be on shaky ground as a military man to speak to the political positions of the nations. I'm sorry to dodge your question, but that's a realistic answer, I think.
What's your personal recommendation? Do you think that it's a tool that you hope that the renewal of the sanctions go back into place rather than speculate on the positions? Are you an advocate for continuing the renewal of the sanctions?
I am, sir. And the way I look at this, it's one of our tools. As I have spoke about today, I think that our opponents use all of the major tools of a nation's power. We use a simple model called DIME, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. The economic piece is what you're talking about. Our opponents use all of those tools to bring great pressure on nations, and we should not take any of those tools off of the table.
Thank you. General, do you think that, or could you talk a little bit about the linkage of Putin's plans in Ukraine with respect to Syria? Is there some sort of strategic linkage there? Can you describe that if there is?
Sir, yes. I do not think that Mr. Putin nor the leaders, the small group of leaders of the Russian Federation do anything in isolation. I think all these things are connected. As I've answered other of your colleagues today, I think that one of the major goals, or two of the major goals of Mr. Putin, is to bring dissolution to either NATO or to the European Union, preferably both. If Mr. Putin can find a way to fracture those alliances or organizations, it makes it much easier for him to accomplish his larger goals in Europe at that point. And so I do not think that any of these operations of Mr. Putin from Syria to the Arctic are disassociated. I believe they are all brought in a broad sense.
General, in your written testimony, you've commented that our current force posture in Europe has been based on Russia as a strategic partner. I think you described it as hugging the bear. That's obviously not working. So what concrete steps do we need to take to change our force posture in Europe to be able to deter Russia more effectively?
Thank you, sir. And so if I could, just very briefly on NATO, I think that what NATO needs to do, I described earlier as bringing the entire force of NATO to an increased readiness and responsiveness. In Wales, we focused on the NRF, the VJTF, and some of the smaller forces, and we're delivering that. But now we need to bring focus across all of the force to bring readiness and responsiveness up. In a U.S. context, as I described in my opening statement, I think it's a sort of a three-step approach, and it'll take me about half a minute to lay that out. First and foremost, our forward position forces are incredibly important, and permanently forward station forces are the optimum. But understanding the environment that we're in, we then look at two other steps to address forward presence. One is that we will look at and a part of ERI is pre-positioning forward materials that we can rapidly fall in on to rapidly increase our posture. And then the second piece is those heel-to-toe, fully funded rotational forces that use the pre-positioning or come over to have presence and exercises. So that's sort of the step 2 basket. The step 3 basket is a little tougher to describe, but in shorthand it is we need to be able to rapidly reinforce. That sounds very straightforward. It is not. Remember that Russia has created a very dense pattern of A2AD, anti-access area denial. We need to be investing in those capabilities and capacities that allow us to enter into an A2AD environment and be able to reinforce. And then some of the investments of European Reassurance Initiative are on the ground, such as improving railheads, railroads, improving our ports and our airfields again, so that once we puncture the A2AD, we can rapidly address our issues. So it's a three-step approach. Look at our forward station forces, look at our rotating forces and preposition materials, and then ensure that we can rapidly reinforce. And that's the framework of which I'm trying to drive the conversation with my leadership.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And General, I want to thank you again for your service. I want to thank your wife. I know that you've committed decades to serving our country. I think you've done it in an outstanding manner, particularly your current billet. I want to follow up on Senator King's questions and in some ways ask similar questions that Senator Graham did. It's 2016. Do you think it's safe to say that Russia has successfully militarized the Arctic?
Sir, I do believe that we see a pattern there that concerns many of our nations and partners. As you know, we share the Arctic with our other NATO ally, Canada, and then 6 other allies and partners of NATO. Each are concerned with what they see happening in the Arctic, where we see the creation of intelligence and surveillance capabilities, weaponization such as surface-to-air missiles, coastal defense cruise missiles, et cetera, et cetera. And so,
4 new BCTs, a new Arctic Command, 13 new airfields.
yes, sir.
So isn't it safe to say that Russia has successfully militarized the Arctic?
They have certainly increased their capability and capacity there.
Can you describe a little bit, you and I have talked about it, but really how massive last year the 2 different Arctic military exercises were? I mean, these were huge, and maybe you can't talk about it in this setting, but I'll ask the question anyways, whether or not we were even aware that they were going to happen or happening. When you move tens of thousands of troops and hundreds of aircraft and dozens of ships, normally that's something the United States military has a inkling about, and it seems in this case they did it and we were pretty unaware. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I would like to have my staff work with yours on some more classified answers to fully flesh this out, but what I would say is I agree with you that we have seen some very demonstrative exercises, and in certain ways they did absolutely surprise us. One of the things that surprised us is how one of those exercises then morphed into a larger exercise in the Western Military District, so that we saw a very large, what I would call strategically focused exercise. Not that an exercise in the Arctic alone is not strategic, but we saw it morph into a bigger exercise.
And when Vladimir Putin does those kind of things, as you mentioned before, that's not normally, there's usually something to that, correct?
Sir, as I said before, I think he's taken a very strategic approach to everything he does.
Let me ask another question. You know, Secretary Carter, General Dunford, they've all mentioned, we've talked about the Arctic in front of this committee, how we're late to the game. You know, if you look at the DOD's Arctic strategy, it's pretty much a joke. It is 13 pages, 6 of which are pictures, mentions climate change 5 times, and mentions Russia solely in a footnote. So I think we provided proper oversight here and in a bipartisan way move forward on requiring the Secretary of Defense to put forward a no-kidding, real strategy and an operations plan for the Arctic. We got a commitment from Secretary Carter and General Dunford to make sure that is a very robust O-plan for the Arctic. Can I get your commitment that we would have the Eucom's participation in that as well? I think it's going to be important.
Absolutely, Senator, and as importantly, NATO is beginning to take a look at this as well.
Great. Let me ask more specific questions. You know, as Russia's building up, you've been in Alaska recently, you're aware that our Department of Defense is looking at building down in the Arctic, getting rid of the only airborne brigade combat team in the Arctic, the Asia Pacific, the only mountain-trained Arctic BCT in the entire U.S. military. That's the 425. You talked about a permanently forward presence. You talk about rapid reinforcement capability. This is a unit that uniquely can do all of those things and fight in the Arctic. To his credit, General Milley has taken a look at this, and he made some comments last week that he thinks that maybe given the situation with regard to Russia, with regard to Korea, that the Army should reverse this decision, what I think is a strategically short-sighted decision. Admiral Harris and General Scaparrotti last week were supportive of that decision by General Milley to keep the 425. Do you support that decision by General Milley, and what do you think that that does to show Vladimir Putin resolve that, hey, wait a minute, things have changed, they're rapidly building up the Arctic, we have this ERI initiative, but we also need forces out east, and the easiest way to keep American resolve is to just keep our best Arctic warriors in place. Do you support what General Milley's doing, and how do you think Vladimir Putin would view keeping that 425, which, by the way, as you know, the Russians watch them train all the time. They do an airborne jump, the Russians do an airborne jump. They are very, very aware of this unit and its capability. Can you comment on those questions?
Senator, I think it's important that we keep this capability and that we maintain its currency and continually address its capability to do its mission. I think Mr. Putin understands physics, and the physics are that those forces in the north across the pole are as close, if not closer, than many other forces we have in our inventory. And so the speed and response of that set of forces and capabilities are very important, and I think Mr. Putin understands it.
And so do you support with General Milley?
We need to keep this capability, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and thank you, General. I've been in and out. But let me ask you about, let me get back to Ukraine and then maybe touch on the refugee crisis too. We've got these frozen conflicts throughout the region, Moldova, Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh. In your judgment, is Ukraine now to be added to that list of frozen conflicts, or is the situation a little too kinetic there for us to know?
Senator, thank you, and please don't take this as any sort of a disagreement, but I really don't like the term frozen conflicts. Almost none of them.
But it's a term that's widely used.
Yes, sir, absolutely. No, and that's where I was going. It is a term that is widely used, but I would like to point out that most of these are still hot, and people are dying in some of these places. There are 4 or 5 of them. Georgia, as I mentioned earlier, the Russians recently moved the line in South Ossetia another 1,600 meters to the south, and it took over a major energy transmission point. Nagorno-Karabakh.
What were the casualties there?
That was done bloodless. They simply moved the line. In Nagorno-Karabakh, we routinely have days where soldiers are injured and occasionally killed there. Transnistria, we haven't seen any actual injuries, but we have seen the reinforcement, refitting, and strengthening of that garrison in Transnistria. South Ossetia, Abkhazia still extant. And now I believe that Ukraine is in a position where the Russians would like to maintain the capability to continue to put military pressure on Kyiv via that conflict. But it is anything but frozen. As I said yesterday, about 71 engagements in the last 24 hours in that area, and over 450 engagements in that area over the last week.
What term would you prefer that we use?
We're wrestling with that, sir, okay. And I think frozen conflicts is good because people recognize it. I'd just like to point out that they're really anything but frozen. Some of them I would call pretty hot.
In your professional military judgment, is the current situation as it stands in Ukraine helpful or harmful to Mr. Putin's long-term interests?
Let me answer the easy question first. The situation in Ukraine is absolutely unhelpful to the people of Ukraine's long-term interests.
There's no question about it.
And Kyiv, there's no question about that. I think that Mr. Putin very much wants to have a hand in the direction of Ukraine, a hand in being able to regulate their desire to join the West, a desire to keep pressure on the economic and political decisions of Kyiv. And so I think that his interests are to maintain enough pressure and influence in the Donbass to be able to shape that. So I think it is in his interest to be able to pressure Kyiv through the tool of the Donbass. I'm not sure that I'm ready to answer whether it's in his long-term interests as it relates to his own national concerns. And is that the question you're asking, Senator? Or,
Yes.
can I get back to you on that?
That would be great. And as far as you have observed, is the Ukrainian government in Kyiv working together?
Sir, I've seen some very good things and some challenges. I think that there is a great commitment. I have sat down personally several times with Mr. Poroshenko and with Mr. Yatsenyuk, and I do think both of those individuals have the best interest of their nation in the future. I think that there are some pretty tough structural problems that they've had to address. And frankly, I think their people expect a lot from them. As I mentioned earlier in this testimony, I think that some of the change they need to make is pretty hard to take when they're on a front and militarily engaged. And so they face some pretty tough challenges ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Let me, Mr. Chairman, if I might, just ask the General briefly with regard to the refugee situation. We had a question, I think, from Senator Manchin when I was at the hearing earlier about the possibility of infiltration, and certainly that's a concern. Would you comment as to the destabilizing effect in the territory of our European allies of this influx of immigrants and migrants passing through, and the prospect for that either increasing or being mitigated somehow?
The destabilizing effects are multifaceted. The easiest ones to speak to is, as I have described before and I have in my written testimony, that I believe there is criminality, terrorists, and foreign fighters in those flows. And those all have their own form of destabilizing effect. Criminality in just moving of humans and moving of drugs and other things, those kind of people using the flows to do that. Terrorists who have ill intent in the West. And then just returning foreign fighters who have skills and may not actually be returning with any ill intent, but when they get home and they have no economic opportunity in others, what do they eventually do with those skills? So there is a lot of destabilizing effect of this criminality, terrorism, and returning foreign fighters. The other piece that is, as I think, more widely understood is just the destabilizing effect economically and straining the social fabric of these nations as these large flows of people already challenged governments and social systems as they arrive. And so I think there's a multifaceted challenge to the nations of Europe.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the chair's indulgence.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to the European Union, someone wrote recently that, oddly, you would think the European Commission, Brussels, would be the one that would lead a unified effort to deal with a migrant crisis. But in fact, in essence, rightly or wrongly, legally or otherwise, they're the ones that are blocking the nation states from taking action that those states would normally take or attempting to block them. Is that correct?
Senator, being a military officer, not a leader of one of these nations, I'm not sure I'm really qualified to say that. But what I would say is that
The rules of the European rules of and the European Union is not making immediate decisions that would facilitate a more effective control. Isn't that correct?
I believe, sir, that there could be efforts made that could bring more unified pressure.
Well, one of the things we all need to, I think, understand here is just because we get a group of nations together that pretend to be an effective leadership, sometimes they undermine the ability of action to actually occur that could be beneficial. Is it still true that a high percentage of these migrants are young males?
I believe that to be true, Senator.
Let me take another subject. Thank you for your great service, you and your wife, and the commitment you've made to the country. You spent now almost 3 years in Europe. You had time as Aviano and Ramstein and other places, so you know the region well. Did the Europeans and NATO, are they willing to improve and increase their share of funding for the defense of Europe? You've raised that a number of times. Would you briefly tell us your latest or communication to the region about what they need to do and what achievements have occurred in the last several years, not promises for the future?
So the numbers I've used today once, Senator, are, again, not going to be perfect. But the numbers that we see now in Europe follow the following line. About 16 of our nations have stopped the decline in their budgets. Not perfect, but a first step.
It's worse than not perfect.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
they've been declining, and they're below their commitment of 2%, most of them, are they not?
Only 5 now, sir, are at 2% or better. And I would offer to you that I believe there's about 7 now that have a realistic plan to attain 2% in a realistic amount of time. So again, not perfect numbers, but this is an improvement since Wales. I don't want to overstate, but it is an improvement since
Well,
Wales.
of course, we have a real interest in Europe and that they be able to be free and independent and not be vulnerable to encroachment from the Russians. However, I mean, I have to ask the President's request for $3.4 billion in European Reassurance Initiative. How much of that has been matched by the Europeans? Do they have any formal commitment to increase their spending for similar projects?
Sir, I cannot speak to individual commitments at this time. What I have seen, not from the 3.4 because it hasn't been delivered yet, but thank you for the first 2 years of VRI. As you know, it was about just under $1 billion the first year and about $800 million the second year. The improvements that we have used that to make in the forward nations to railheads, ports, and airfields.
Well, let me just, so my time would erode here, but this is very troubling. So a European delegation from Parliament group was here, not asked them to increase their spending, and the head of the delegation responded quite frankly. He said, Senator, we agree it's unacceptable that the United States pays 75% of the cost of NATO. So now we have this problem that we need to have some more resources there, and we add $3.4 billion, and these countries aren't even putting in their fair share. I'm wondering, do they have a will to survive themselves, and or are they just gotten in the habit of expecting us to step up to the plate to fund their defense. It's an unacceptable thing, as a parliamentarian said. Would you have any final comments?
Well, sir,
on
on that, we observed the same thing over the last 20 years when the nations of Europe were trying to treat Russia as a partner. They all took a vector, which was decreasing budgets. And again, I don't want to overstate, but what we've seen since Wales is at least a turning in the bow of the ship. It's not perfect yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sullivan has one additional question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I appreciate your focus on all instruments of American power as part of our strategy. Last week there was a very good article, front-page article in the Wall Street Journal on the importance of the beginning of LNG shipments from the United States, because we're now once again the world's energy superpower in terms of oil and gas production. LNG shipments from the United States to Europe, to some of the countries we've been talking about, to some of the countries that are at risk of Russian energy blackmail as part of their policies. How important is that part of our national power as an instrument for the longer-term strategy to thwart Russian aggression and to provide a morale boost to some of these countries over there that feel like they're under the boot of the Russian energy policies? That certainly came out in this article. I don't know if you had the opportunity to read it.
Senator, I'm not sure I've read that exact article, but the concept is absolutely applicable, as we have discussed a little bit here today as well. Just like you stated, Russia uses every element, and that economic element is both in the terms of pressure on returning payments and calling in loans, et cetera, but a huge part of that economic tool that is used, as you correctly state, fuels in all manners are used as a tool, restrictions and pricing of those fuels. So anything that we can do to broaden the capability of the nations to be able to deal with that pressure, I think is a good possibility, a good process.
Thank you, Mr.
General, would it be of great concern to us if Russia developed a capability to sever our transatlantic cables?
Yes, Senator, it would, or excuse me, Chairman, it would.
Thank you. General, we really appreciate your appearances before this committee, but most of all, your outstanding leadership, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future. But to me, you are the very best of what we expect of our military leadership, and I thank you. Jackie?
I simply want to second the chairman's comments very sincerely and very appreciatively.
Thank you, sir.